All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Sovereign State Show. I'm your host, Brandis P. Bonos. I got a big show coming up for you guys today. I hope you guys are very excited. Man, there's a lot to get into. There's a lot to talk about. Today, we're going to be going over Trump's decision to deploy the military to Venezuela and potentially Mexico. And there is a lot of moving pieces here. There's a lot of fascinating history to go through here. The potential consequences of this could be vast. There could be serious unintended consequences if we push things over the edge in any of these various Latin American countries. So we have to be very cautious in the way we approach this, and I'm going to give you guys the full breakdown, give you guys my thoughts, why I think this might be good, why I think this could be disastrous, and we're going to talk all about that. But before I get into that, I want to spend a little bit of time discussing the RFK Jr. Senate committee hearing yesterday because I have a lot to say about it. And before I get into that, the first thing I want to go over is the Trump administration, specifically Trump 2, has been a huge awakening and a huge red pill for me insofar as politics is concerned. You know, at the end of the day, we can vote, we can choose our representatives in the House, in the executive branch, but at the end of the day, all of these politicians, whether you like it or not, are owned by private interests. They're owned by AIPAC, they're owned by Big Pharma, they're owned by the NRA, they're owned by Wall Street, they're owned by business interests, they're owned by billionaires. And so at the end of the day, regardless of whether or not the candidate that we voted for ends up in the throne, fundamentally, they don't represent our interests. The most we can do is shout and scream from the nosebleeds, but the people who are actually in the field playing are not us. They're the people that I just referred to. And you cannot say the same of a place like China or a place like Russia or a place like North Korea or a place like Iran, because the people who run that country are the people in the government. The people who run our country are unelected officials and special interest groups and the capitalist class who basically run the country from the background. They're the ones who are really pulling the strings. They're the ones who are really calling the shots. Everything else is theater, spectacle. Politics in many ways is really just a Hollywood production. If you look at what goes on between the Democrats and the Republicans, the accusations, the lies, the slander, all of that is for show, because fundamentally, at the end of the day, we live under a uniparty. That is to say, the Democrats and the Republicans both conspire and work together to achieve the interests that they both have in common at the expense of the common people. And it's truly a shame. And why that relates to what we see with RFK Jr. and the entire Trump administration is because all of these people ran on a ticket of populism, of reforming the system, of fighting against the deep state. And on every single one of these issues, they have continued the legacy of the deep state. They have continued the legacy of previous administrations. The Biden administration, the Obama administration, the Bush, the Clintons, the Reagans, it's all the same. The doctrine has not changed. The only thing that has actually changed has been the aesthetics, not the actual software, not the actual substance. And so that's why we keep getting the same policies. We keep getting corporate tax cuts. We keep getting additions to the deficit. No mass deportations, no wall. We're not restraining Israel. If anything, we're actually doubling down on our support of Israel by deporting so-called anti-Semites, withholding FEMA funds from states that practice BDS, withholding university funds, withholding grants from Ivy League institutions for being too Israel critical, using Canary Mission to spy on Ivy League presidents, Ivy League faculty, Ivy League students. And Canary Mission is effectively an anonymous website that has an entire catalog of thousands of people who are quote-unquote anti-Semites based on whether they have said things on social media that have been critical of Israel, that have been pro-Palestinian, and then they slander them and call them pro-Hamas on this website that effectively doxes people and blacklists people from getting jobs. The Department of Homeland Security is working with Canary Mission. Our intelligence agencies are working with Canary Mission. And so we have failed on that front. We failed with the tariffs. We still don't have tariffs. We repealed the baseline tariffs. We pulled back on coercive tariffs and sector-specific tariffs. So the Liberation Day tariffs were a complete failure. No reshoring. Very little success in bringing back manufacturing. And no mass deportations, no wall, as I've already said. We're bringing in 600,000 Chinese students. And we don't have a deal with Iran. We don't have a deal with Russia. There's no ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. All of it has been an abject failure on every single level. There is no question about it. There is no doubt about that. It is objective. It is an objective truth that the ticket that the Trump administration campaigned, what they ran on, is different from what we're actually getting, or is different from what we are actually getting. The difference is day and night. And yesterday, the Senate committee hearing with RFK Jr. really summed all of this up. Because RFK Jr., this health nut, this conspiracy theorist, who's running on making America healthy again, getting rid of seed oils, getting rid of pesticides, improving or abolishing mRNA vaccines, this kook is being questioned by the Senate, and he doesn't even know any of the basic information on vaccines and their efficacy. And it really just sums everything up. It really puts everything into perspective, what a clown show, what a circus, all of this has been. The Trump administration has been one big circus. It's been one big Hollywood production. I mean, you have Senator Cantwell from Washington State, pulling out a cardboard cutout of a tweet, or not of a tweet, but pulling out a cardboard cutout of statistics and data revealing the efficacy of smallpox, polio, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccinations after RFK Jr. has gone on the record saying these vaccinations cause autism. They have a 99 to 100% efficacy rate, and we're supposed to believe that the person who doesn't have a master's or a doctorate in public health administration, in public health, he didn't go to medical school, he doesn't have a medical degree, he's not an epidemiologist, he's not a virologist, he's not a doctor. We're supposed to believe that this guy, this kook, this conspiracy theorist, who actually sounds like he has many of the diseases and illnesses that he talks about, he sounds like he has a respiratory problem, he sounds like he has a chronic illness, he sounds like he's going to die every time he opens his mouth. He was wheezing for 3 hours straight. This is the guy who I'm supposed to believe, who has zero credentials whatsoever, who couldn't even tell you what a virus or bacteria are, their structure. He couldn't even describe that to you. This is the guy who's overseeing the health of hundreds of millions of Americans. We're supposed to take his word rather than the word of the American Medical Association, the American Pediatric Association, the Center for Disease Control, and hundreds of thousands of doctors who have gone through medical school, who have gone through the training, who have done the studies, who have replicated the studies, who have conducted meta-analyses on various vaccination reports that have proved over several decades that various vaccines that they've mandated in schools around the United States, they have proven that they are successful, that they are reliable, that they are effective over decades of research. We are supposed to ignore all that and all the evidence and all the statistics and all the data for some kook and 3 doctors who he brought on to run on his ticket. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And look, I get it. At the end of the day, we all understand that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, as Senator Bernie Sanders pointed out, all of them are taking money from Big Pharma. Big Pharma pays off these academic research universities and whoever else is doing these scientific trials before bringing their drugs to market. Big Pharma is paying them to fabricate the studies and produce fabricated results or skewed results that protect the efficacy and downplay the side effects of these various drugs. We understand what's going on here. We understand how corrupt Big Pharma is, and we understand that all these politicians are being paid by Big Pharma to win in the House and to win in the Senate. And the Trump administration has a point, and I agree with them about that. Something needs to be done about that because that's an obvious conflict of interest. It's an obvious problem. But to basically just ignore all medical research, all meta-analyses, decades and decades and decades of replicating various studies, we're supposed to ignore all of that and instead trust the word of this one guy who is not even a doctor. How does that make any sense? It doesn't. Anyways, besides that, another thing that's so bizarre about that whole entire hearing is the fact that all of these people are ancient. All of these people are fossils. They're geezers. We're talking about Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Bill Cassidy, Senator Chuck Presley. All of these people are ancient. Maria Cantwell. You know, these people are in their late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s even. And it's so bizarre watching these people go back and forth and talk over each other and not talk into the mic and slur their words and lose track of their sentences, lose their train of thought. Like, all of it is just, why can't we get serious people in the Senate? Why does it have to be these career politicians, people who have been in the same seat, in the same district, running for 30, 40, 50 years, who have done nothing, absolutely nothing to change the trajectory of this country? They've done nothing but serve the capitalist class. That's it. When can we get something new? When can we get some fresh faces? When can we get people who are, I mean, I hate to be crude, I hate to be crass about saying this, but I can't wait till these people are gone. And not dead, but I mean out of office. Because I'm tired of Bernie Sanders. I'm tired of Elizabeth Warren. I'm tired of Chuck Presley. Chuck Presley had his paper in his hands when he was supposed to be asking his questions. He had his paper in his hands like this. He had his glasses on. He's leaning forward, and his microphone is 45 degrees away from his mouth. He's not even talking into the microphone half the time. And all the senators around him had to remind him, Senator Presley, you're not speaking into the microphone. It's just, it looks horrible. The optics of it are terrible. And I'm sure our adversaries are making fun of us for this because it looks comical. It looks deeply unserious. And, you know, the whole thing is just, it's so ridiculous. And RFK Jr. is a clown. I mean, that should be obvious, but he's a clown as well. I mean, this guy looks like he would be better suited wearing a tank top with grease stains on it. That would be more comfortable for him than a suit and a tie and a button-down shirt. He looks like he would be more comfortable and more at home walking around with a tank top, cargo shorts, flip-flops, with a beer in his hand and a tattoo of a lion on his shoulder. That is what when you look at his physiognomy, that is what he reminds you of when you look at him. He doesn't look like a serious person. He looks like a trailer park. Anyways, that's besides the point. All I'm saying here is the anti-intellectualism stuff has gone way too far. Now everything is a conspiracy theory, and I'm genuinely getting sick of it. I'm genuinely getting tired of it. Because at the end of the day, if you want a society that's stable, if you want a society that's sane, if you want a high-trust society, your institutions have to be reliable. Your institutions have to be trustworthy. Because if they are not, you're going to get kooks like Trump and RFK Jr. and all the sycophants and the entire MAGA cult who basically just ignore and deny academic and medical consensus and scientific consensus and replace that with conspiracy theories and whack jobs who don't have any credentials whatsoever. So anyways, that's my take on that. The personnel stuff, it is absurd. And the Trump administration could have been so much more. It could have been so much better But this is seriously a wake-up call. We need something different. I mean, we just need something different. We need fresh faces. We need new people. I cannot wait until the neoliberals and the neoconservatives are all gone. And hopefully by that time, hopefully, the level of consciousness will have been elevated to the point that people will begin to realize that the capitalist class does not serve the common man and the common woman. And we'll get people in office who genuinely are interested in reflecting the will of the people and exercising the will of the people, and not just doing corporate tax cuts and not increasing the price of insurance premiums. So anyways, that's my take on that. I am starting to lose my faith in electoral politics. I really don't know if they're even still viable. It really does just feel like two wings of the same bird. So anyways, that's my take on that. I don't want to drag that on too long. We're going to switch gears here. We're going to talk about the Trump strike on the vessel, the Venezuelan vessel that supposedly was controlled by Tren de Aragua. And we're also going to talk about Trump deploying 10 aircrafts, 10 fighter jets to Puerto Rico. So the first thing I'll say is this, right? When you talk about a place like Venezuela and you talk about a place like Latin America, it is important to keep in mind that the right and the left in Latin America are significantly different from the right and the left in the United States of America. And here's what I mean. In America, the right and the left, it's more of an ideological distinction. It is free trade, NAFTA, conservative traditional cultural values on the right, and on the left you have more social justice values, people who are people who are more egalitarian, people who are pro-LGBTQ, anti-capitalist. That's kind of what it is in America. It's more of an ideological distinction, but both people serve the capitalist class. In Latin America, though, the right and the left, it's a matter of life or death. The right in Latin America serves the Catholic Church, they serve the landowners, they serve the business elites, they serve the politicians who are pro-US, pro-neoliberal austerity measures and all that kind of stuff. And then on the left, you have people who are communists, people who are egalitarian, people who are third worldist, people who advocate for the poor, people who are communist. And the fight down there and the mark that communism and the Cold War left on Latin America still exists to this very day. And so the fight down there is a lot more intense. It's a lot more life or death. And the consequences have resulted in the deaths of millions of people. Violence from paramilitary groups, guerrilla groups, insurgent groups, local gangs, cartels, and transnational gangs, all fighting for influence over the government, and the government using these various groups as a kind of buffer against factions that have a distinct ideology, whether it be left or right. So it's important to understand that the politics in Latin America are significantly different from what they are in the United States. It's important to keep that in mind. Insofar as this strike against this vessel is concerned, this is the latest from the Wall Street Journal. It says here, did a boat strike in the Caribbean exceed Trump's authority to use military force? President Trump was operating within his constitutional powers as commander-in-chief when he ordered the U.S. military to destroy a vessel in the Caribbean, administration officials said, describing the drugs it was allegedly smuggling as an imminent national security threat. But that claim was sharply disputed by legal experts and some lawmakers who said that Trump exceeded his legal authority by using lethal military force against a target that posed no direct danger to the United States and doing so without congressional authorization. It says here, the Trump administration said Tuesday's strike, which killed 11 people on the boat, was just the opening salvo in an expanded campaign to dismantle the drug cartels they say pose a major threat to Americans. So there you have it. This is just the beginning of a salvo. This is the beginning of a, quote, expanded campaign to dismantle the drug cartels. So my take on it is very straightforward. It's very simple. There's two ways of looking at this. There's Venezuela, and then there's the cartels in Mexico. So there's two different groups that they are prioritizing here. In Mexico, the cartels effectively run the country. They are embedded in local municipalities. They're embedded in local economies. They give people jobs. They fund schools. They fund infrastructure projects. They pay off politicians and the federal government. So the cartels are deeply entrenched in the social fabric of Mexico. The only part of Mexico in which the Mexican government has any authority or real control, and when I say control, I mean control they can actually exercise, real sovereignty. The only place in Mexico where that even exists is Mexico City. The reason why is because Mexico City is run by the federal government. It is run by the government of Mexico. So the cartels cannot, in any significant degree, operate within Mexico City without experiencing significant oversight and crackdowns and force from the Mexican government. However, it's very different in the more rural parts, in various states, in the northern part, in the southern part, and in the western and eastern parts of the country that surround the capital. There are various cartels, the New Jalisco, or the New Generation Jalisco cartel, Los Zetas, the Sinaloa cartel. All of these cartels effectively operate different territories within Mexico. Some operate on the northern border near Texas and Arizona and New Mexico. Some operate near California. Some operate near the Pacific Ocean on the western side of the country. Some operate on the eastern side of the country. Some are more on the southern side of the country near the Central American countries. So it's important to understand that there are various cartels, and each of them is armed to the teeth with military-grade technology, armored personnel carriers, homemade tanks, homemade explosives, IEDs, rocket launchers in some cases. They have surface-to-air missile launchers that can be operated by one man. They have protective gear. They have rifles, you name it. They have all the stuff that you would see in a modern military. So these cartels are armed to the teeth, and they are deeply embedded in politics, and they're deeply embedded in local economies and in the local communities. So to effectively weed these people out, it would take a sustained effort, not just to destroy their infrastructure, not just to destroy their ability to produce illicit drugs, but you would actually have to go in and fundamentally reform the government of Mexico in a way where they can actually exercise their power and control over the entire state. You can't just go in there and kill a couple guys, arrest a couple narcos, cut the head off the snake at the top, blow up a couple of these manufacturing sites. You can't do that. That's not going to work. You have to fundamentally revamp the country. You have to fundamentally give the Mexican government the means by which it can give its citizens a higher quality of life and jobs and an economy and a job market where they won't actually have to rely on illicit means of survival, of drug trafficking to survive. That would take a sustained effort on an economic front, on a political front, not just military. So this idea that we're going to go in there and kill the cartels and blow up a couple of these sites and spray pesticides on their coca plants or whatever, it's asinine. It's not going to work. Now, fundamentally, the doctrine of getting rid of the cartels, of getting rid of these Venezuelan transnational criminal organizations, of course I support that as an American. It is in our best interest. It's in our national security interest to remove these threats from our southern border and to remove them from being entrenched in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, it has to be done. But this idea that in a society of hundreds of millions of people, where the vast majority of the population is living in abject poverty, and their only means of survival is through working with the cartels. The local municipalities are owned by the cartels. The politicians, in some cases, are owned by the cartels. This proposition that you can just kill thousands of people and expect that to change the equation, it doesn't make any sense. Short term, it could work. Short term, you go in, you kill thousands of people, although that's going to lead to thousands of casualties. But you go in, You kill thousands of people through special forces, through collaborating with the Mexican military, Mexican intelligence. You blow up their manufacturing sites. You sabotage their ability to actually produce and transport these illicit drugs, fentanyl, cocaine, heroin. In the short term, that can work. In the short term, their ability and the amount, the quantity that they can export to the United States, to Europe, to other Latin American countries, in the short term, it'll handicap them. But long term, as I've already stated, it requires a far more comprehensive and holistic approach if you actually want to solve this problem for the decades to come. So, for me personally, my priorities as an American will always be the job market, will always be the economy, will always be whether or not I'll be able to afford a home when I'm in my 30s, have a family and afford a family when I'm in my 30s, whether or not I'll be able to save enough money for my kids' college tuition, whether or not I'll be able to even get a job with the bachelor's degree that I have once I graduate. Will the job market be too competitive? Will there be too many immigrants competing for too few jobs? These are the kinds of questions that I want answered. Personally, I'm not worried about the cartel. I'm not worried about Venezuela. I'm not worried about Tren de Aragua. Those are not my concerns. My concerns are here in this country first and foremost. So, all the saber rattling, all the posturing, none of that really is a primary concern to me. This is not what I voted for. I didn't vote for a war against the cartels. I didn't vote for a war against Venezuela. We've been fine up to this point. I mean, maybe not fine. I shouldn't say that. But generally speaking, the problems that are more prescient in this country are not related to the cartels. I feel like that gets played up. Be that as it may, I will say there is a significant distinction to be made between fighting the cartels in Mexico and fighting the cartels in Venezuela, and that's for a couple reasons. The first one is that Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, 303 billion barrels. That's proven. And they have one of the most, they have some of the most vast gold reserves and reserves of critical minerals on Earth as well. So their natural resources are immense. So if we go in, hypothetically we go in, we kill Maduro, we overthrow him, we dismantle the cartels, the paramilitary groups, and let's just say this is a perfect scenario. We go in, dismantle the paramilitary groups, the guerrilla groups, the militias, replace them with a friendlier government, dismantle the gangs, and we put in a puppet who's going to just hand over his critical minerals, hand over his oil at a price that we could consider a bargain. Of course, I would be all for that. I'm not a third worldist. At the end of the day, I'm not in theory opposed to the idea of an empire. I'm not. I just want to make sure that the empire is being run in a way that is logical, in a way that's sensical, and in a way that comports to our own national security interests and our own economic interests, but more than that, the interests of the people who live in this country. Because the way I look at it is like this. We're fighting a proxy war with Russia. We're on the verge of fighting a proxy war with China. Most of these think tanks, most of these Pentagon planners think that we might have to deal with an amphibious landing in Taiwan from China within the next 5 to 10 years, okay? So we're fighting in Russia. We're sending our offensive and defensive systems to Ukraine. We're sending offensive and defensive systems to Taiwan. We've approved billions of dollars in aid, in military aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel in the past 2 years already. Billions of dollars in military aid packages. We're fighting in the Horn of Africa. We're bombing Somalia basically every day. We are still just barely pulling out of Iraq and Syria. Literally just 3 years ago or 4 years ago pulled out of Afghanistan. And now on top of all that, in preparation for a potential conflict with Iran, we still want to go and fight against the cartels, and we want to fight against Venezuela, while China is posturing to fight against Taiwan. I don't know. That just seems like extreme to me. Because you have to consider the fact that every time we give a defensive or an offensive system to Ukraine, that's one less that we could give to Taiwan or Israel. So my concern is that we get overextended. And when we're overextended, China uses that as an opportunity to effectively consume and take over the state of Taiwan, which would give them effectively a monopoly on semiconductor manufacturing worldwide and would put us at a tremendous disadvantage in the arms race, in the AI race. We would be at a tremendous disadvantage if China were able to conquer and take over Taiwan and TSMC. I mean, that would be a complete disaster, a nightmare scenario for us. Now, I'm sure there's a contingency plan for that at the Pentagon. If that happens, they'll probably just blow up TSMC and all their manufacturing sites in Taiwan, depending on how many they have. And it would render China's ability to take their technology and reverse engineer it or improve it, it would render that ability obsolete. That threat would be neutralized. But regardless, I am still concerned that fighting on all these different fronts, fighting in all these different theaters, in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in the Indo-Pacific, and now in Latin America, how is that a wise strategic decision? How is that a wise strategic move? So I'm sure, because I'm not an expert on this, but I'm sure there is somebody who has thought about this already. Somebody's thought this through. And the approach, if it's more even-handed, if the approach is more even-handed insofar as Venezuela and the cartels are concerned, then I could see that being a successful strategy. But otherwise, there has to be a more intelligent and more even-handed way of going about this. Be that as it may, the situation with Venezuela fundamentally could go one of two ways. The first way is we have a limited strike, we have limited engagement, special forces, collaboration with the anti-government forces to overthrow Maduro. We put a bounty on his head. We could do that. We could get rid of him. We could take their resources. But the problem with that is pretty straightforward. You have to consider the fact that in a place like Venezuela, you have guerrilla groups, you have militias, you have paramilitary organizations, you have local gangs, and you have transnational gangs. You have the Colombian gangs like Los Rastrojas, or I'm sorry, I forget the way to pronounce it. Los Rastrojas is the way you pronounce it. You have the Colombian gangs who are associated with the right, which is to say they're associated with the Catholic Church, they're associated with the landowners, the business interests in Colombia that are pro-U.S. You have the gangs that fractured from the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. They split into two gangs, Los Urabeños and Los Rastrojas. Los Rastrojas. The way these gangs are pronounced is so confusing. But you have two gangs, major gangs, in Colombia that are transnational, and they have ties to the right wing in Colombia, and they're operating in Venezuela. You have the National Liberation Army. You have the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. You have Cartel of the Suns. You have Tren de Aragua. You have all these rogue anti-Maduro gangs in various parts of Venezuela. And what you're telling me is that we overthrow Maduro and we put in a puppet and all of a sudden the state's going to be stable? I think that's absolutely insane. You have cartels from Colombia. You have rogue gangs that are anti-Maduro. You have the National Liberation Army. You have the FARC, which is pro-Maduro, the pro-Maduro forces, the pro-Bolivian revolutionary forces, pro-Bolivian revolution forces fighting in Venezuela. And they're already fighting on a daily basis against these Colombian cartels, suppressing the local gangs. You have the colectivos. You have these various militias, some of them being pro, some of them being anti-Maduro, various guerrilla gangs, many of them being anti-Maduro, many of them being pro-Maduro, who use asymmetrical warfare to achieve their ideological goals. You're meaning to tell me in a state like this, with as many factions, as many paramilitaries, militias, and guerrilla groups as Syria, you're meaning to tell me that in a situation like that, we can just topple the government replace it with a new guy, and everything's going to be A-okay? How does that even compute? How does that even register? Look at a place like Syria. You have the Turkish-backed forces, you had the YPK, you had the Kurdish forces, you had Hezbollah, you had the IRGC fighting in Iran, and they were pro-Assad. You had the National Arab Army, or the Arab National Army. You have the Syrian army fighting against these jihadist groups, ISIS, al-Nusra, the Shiite militias. You have the Wagner group. I mean, and what happened? 500,000 people dead. Millions of refugees out of Syria to Europe. Now there's a refugee crisis in Europe, and they're doing Operation Raise the Flag because there's too many immigrants, there's too many Muslims, and you have people in the UK creating districts and towns that practice Sharia law. So you're meaning to tell me that in a place that is almost identical to Syria in terms of the amount of warring factions in the state, you're meaning to tell me we go there, we war, we overthrow the government in a country that's had net negative migration for the past, which is to say they've had more people leave the country than come in. They've had net negative migration in the hundreds of thousands for the past 10 years, flooding the United States in droves, millions of people coming here. You're meaning to tell me if we overthrow the head of state with all these different revolutionary factions, that it's just going to be smooth sailing? Really? Really? We saw what happened in Syria. We saw what happened in Somalia. When you go there and you overthrow the governments and you sanction the country and you destabilize them, the inevitable consequence is a mass emigration, which is to say mass exodus out of these countries. We're going to be the ones who absorb these Venezuelan criminals. We're going to be the ones who absorb these Venezuelan immigrants. We're going to be the ones who absorb these Somalian immigrants, the Middle Eastern immigrants. This is what happens. Same thing happens in Europe. And it creates destabilizing effects for the society, culturally, religiously, politically. It doesn't work. You can't do it. There is a certain approach, there is a certain tact, there is a certain strategy that you need to implement if you ever want an approach like this to be successful. That's big picture. So my take on it is we have to be incredibly careful. We have to be incredibly precise in the way that we approach these conflicts, because if not, the consequences could be disastrous. Now, here's what I'll say. The other thing I'll say about Venezuela from a more, I guess, positive, from a more optimistic perspective is the fact that if we break Venezuela, the inevitable consequence is that we weaken Hezbollah, we weaken the IRGC, which is to say we weaken Iran, we weaken the axis of evil, and we reclaim hegemony and control over the Western Hemisphere. You have to consider the fact that Venezuela and Iran and Hezbollah and all these countries in the axis of evil, China, Russia, North Korea, Venezuela has been cooperating with them since Maduro took over. So, for example, Iran has built drone facilities at Venezuelan air bases. They've signed a 20-year strategic agreement with Iran that encompasses cooperation in energy and defense and finance. In 2024, they signed an AI research and development agreement. And Iran has helped Venezuela repair oil refineries and build new oil refineries across the country. And in this agreement, what they effectively do is Iran brings Venezuela cheap oil because Venezuela's oil has been sanctioned heavily by various countries, which is the reason why, by the way, they're so reliant on drug trafficking and arms trafficking. So to bypass the sanctions that we have on both Iran and Venezuela, they have cooperated. So Venezuela, with its vast gold and oil reserves, will give critical minerals and gold to Iran to get oil at a cheap discount, at a cheaper price. And they've been doing this for over a decade now. They've been doing this since we started sanctioning Iran for its nuclear program and since we started sanctioning Iran for the Bolivarian Revolution, actually. On top of that, you have the fact that Venezuela and North Korea, they have embassies in each state. Venezuela has an embassy in North Korea, and vice versa. Venezuela and China, they're doing joint infrastructure projects. China has lended billions of dollars to Venezuela to build housing. And then, of course, you have infrastructure projects on rail, on transportation that China is taking upon themselves to build in Venezuela. And then lastly, Russia and Venezuela, they are exchanging weapons. Russia is sending aircraft and naval vessels to Venezuela, and they helped them build their first nuclear plant. So you have to consider the fact that when you look at this conflict, when you look at Venezuela in the context of Iran, North Korea, Russia, China, the situation overall is we get rid of Venezuela and we weaken inadvertently or in effect all these other countries that are benefiting from Venezuelan oil and Venezuelan critical minerals and gold. And North Korea, China, Russia, all of them, Iran, they've all been cooperating with each other since the start of the Ukraine war and even before, but especially since then. Russia is sending military technology that they pick up on the battlefield to China, to North Korea, and to Iran to reverse engineer it. China is sending Russia, Iran, and North Korea fighter jet parts, drone parts, so that they can use it for their own militaries. North Korea is building weapons depots in Iran. They're helping them build manufacturing sites for military weapons in Iran. They're doing the same in Russia. And then, of course, Iran is sending Shahed drones to China, to North Korea, to Russia. They're doing joint naval exercises and joint army exercises. Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, they're all doing it together. So they're all cooperating on some level. And Venezuela is only the fifth piece of the puzzle to this whole equation, to this whole anti-American, anti-Western bloc that's been developing for the better part of 10 years now. So if you get rid of Venezuela, you weaken all those other countries. And that's really the entire goal of this. That's really the bigger picture here. Getting rid of Maduro obviously needs to happen. We obviously need to do it. It is in our best interest. You get rid of Maduro, you put in a puppet, you take their critical minerals, you take their gold, you get it at a discount, then we can use that to manufacture our own technology because, of course, many of the critical minerals that you'll find in Venezuela, lithium, silicon, all of that stuff can be used in modern technology, in iPhones, in drones, in aircrafts, in tanks. So we can take their stuff, get it for cheaper, and then increase the margins to increase our profits here. And then on top of that, we can get their oil for cheaper, get their oil at a discount, control that country, and maybe in the process, reform a lot of these other Latin American countries that are tied to the cartels. We can go after the Colombian cartels and basically create an entire realignment in Latin America away from these Eastern countries, away from China, away from Russia, away from Iran, because that's becoming a serious problem now. So this doctrine, like I said, this doctrine from Trump, theoretically, I approve of it. Theoretically, I support it. Theoretically, we should get rid of all these cartels, paramilitaries, guerrilla groups, these communist blocs, these communist gangs, these drug traffickers who are killing thousands of Americans. Theoretically, I support all of that. But in practice, the concern is that we have Syria 2.0. Because that's a real possibility. In a country that is effectively a kleptocratic narco-petro state. That's what Venezuela is. 95%, I believe, 95% of their exports are oil. And when you sanction them from being able to export their oil, which is their only export and makes up over half of their government's revenue, when you sanction one of the most important and vital exports in the country, the only thing that makes them economically viable, they have to resort to illicit means of acquiring wealth. They have a society. They have people to feed. They have a state to run. So you sanction their oil, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get a mass exodus from the country. You're going to destabilize the country. You're going to have a collapsing society on the verge of being a failed state. You're going to have all these warring factions terrorist acts in the street, bombings, assassinations, kidnappings. That's what you're going to get. So in effect, I am worried about what happens if we go after the cartels, if we go after these Venezuelan transnational gangs. We go after them hard. We kill thousands of their guys. That doesn't trickle over into Texas. That doesn't trickle over into California. So, I mean, just logistically, there are problems with all of this and how it will look in effect. Like I said, theoretically, on the doctrinal level, I support it, but it needs to be done with major caution and major precision. Like, have we not already done enough to destroy and destabilize Venezuela? Have we not already done enough? So, anyways, that's that. The last thing I'm going to say is this, and this is a more interesting angle on this. Let's consider here, though, that Iran and the IRGC and Hezbollah especially have effectively been running a transnational drug trafficking and arms trafficking and money laundering network through Venezuela for 10, 20 years now. You can go all the way back to the 90s. In 1992, Hezbollah blows up an Israeli embassy, kills 20 people in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. They do the same thing in 1994. At a Jewish community center, they kill 85 people. Hezbollah was implicated in both of these attacks. And I have a report here from RAND, and I'm going to read from it really quickly, so pay close attention. But I have a report here from RAND, which is one of the oldest and most prestigious think tanks in America. And they have a list of all the things that Hezbollah has been implicated in Latin America right here. So, in Panama, they bombed an airliner in 1994. They killed everybody on it, including the Jewish passengers who were on it. They were arrested for scouting a embassy in Peru in 2014. They had a member of Hezbollah who was arrested for that. In 2024, Majid Azizi, linked to Iran's Quds Force, was arrested for planning to kill an Israeli in Peru. This was in 2024, last year. And then in 2007, Shekri Harb, who was linked to Hezbollah and linked to the Medellin cartel, was arrested for cocaine smuggling and money laundering. And then in Venezuela, you have the Conviasa, which is the state-run airline, was sanctioned for transporting operatives and illegal items across the world. And they were sanctioned by the United States. And then, of course, in Brazil, the federal police in 2023 uncovered a Hezbollah plot to attack Jewish synagogues and an Israeli embassy. So there you have it, right? And there's more examples on here, but you get the gist. So Hezbollah is getting favors from the Venezuelan government. They're getting documentation, they're getting bank account access, they're getting fake IDs, and in the process, they are being issued all of this from the government, which gives them legitimacy to operate. They are being given the ability to operate these front companies that have ties to Hezbollah all the way back in Lebanon, and they're being allowed to open up bank accounts under the auspices of being legitimate citizens, and they're using the funds that they acquire from arms trafficking, drug trafficking, money laundering through fake used car sales companies and casinos to effectively arm their ability to cause terror in the Middle East. And all of this is being done via Venezuela. So you have to take into consideration the Israeli angle in this too. This is in Israel's interest as well. To weed out, it's in our interest, it's in Israel's interest, which is why I believe we'll probably be attempting a coup of some sort in Venezuela in the coming years. But it's in our interest, and it's in Israel's interest, to basically weed out this Iranian Hezbollah faction element that is basically penetrating the entire continent, but especially Venezuela. They're blowing up people in Argentina. They're plotting to assassinate people and blow up embassies in Peru and in Brazil. They're blowing up airliners in Panama. They are involved in drug trafficking, arms trafficking to and from Venezuela. They're a part of an illicit gold mining, illegal gold mining trade, which is taking vast sums of natural resources that are incredibly valuable without any permission to do so, with no authorization, with no legal means to do so. And of course, all of that is going back to their Hezbollah arm that is being armed and funded to carry out terrorist attacks in Israel on their northern border. So you have to consider the fact that we're going after Maduro, we're going after Hezbollah, which is a transnational terrorist organization, we're going after all these cartels, we're going after Maduro, we're going after Iran. We're basically ripping apart and dismantling that entire network. And the reason for that is our national security. So putting it all into perspective, it makes perfect sense. Putting it all into perspective, it actually is in our national security interests to carry this out. I just don't know how it's going to unfold. That's my only concern, because we keep getting the same things over and over. Look at Europe. Do you guys see Europe right now? Have you seen what's going on over there with Operation Raise the Colors? People are at the point now where mass migration, where cultural conflict, where liberal, leftist, anti-nationalist propaganda has effectively convinced people that raising the flag of the country that they live in is a racist act. And I'm sure some of the people doing it are racist. They don't like Muslims, but I think the vast majority, in this case, I think the vast majority of the people participating in this Operations Raise the Colors project, the vast majority of the people involved in it are just regular citizens who want to feel proud of their country. And they want to feel like their country is a home again. They don't want to feel like they live in this liberal, multiverse hell world where they can't raise the flag and they can't be proud of their culture or their identity as English people. People get tired of that. Eventually, people will rebel because they'll realize how irrational that really is. To hate yourself for your nationality, to hate yourself for your skin color, hate yourself for your race, your ethnicity, your culture. That's not going to work. That's not a message that people are going to subscribe to. Logically, that doesn't make sense. Rationally, that doesn't make sense. So, of course, you're going to have all these people who are in open rebellion against mass migration. Because mass migration changes the social fabric. It changes the culture. It changes the politics. Because if you have all these people who don't speak English, they're Arabic, they have a completely different civilization, a completely different culture, a completely different way of living, completely different politics, completely different worldview, coming to a modern, first world Western country, and they can't assimilate, not only because they don't want to assimilate, or not only because they can't assimilate, but because they don't want to assimilate. They actually want to take over. They want to spread Islam. Every single place during the Arab Spring, in Tunisia and Algeria and Morocco and Egypt and various countries where all of these Muslims and people in North Africa rose up to overthrow their governments in support of liberal democracy, in every single case, they all voted in an Islamist. They voted in an Islamist in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Algeria, in Egypt. In all these places, they just voted in Islamists. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these Muslims don't care for liberal democracy. They don't care about it. They don't want it. They don't like it. They like Islamism. They want to Arabize and practice Sharia law in whatever country they go to. Their goal is not to assimilate. Their goal is to conquer. Their goal is to take over. And I'm not saying this because I don't like Muslims or I don't like Arabs or whatever. No, they're great people. There's Persians in LA. There's plenty of Arabs and Muslims that live in Orange County, and I think they're great people, but they're not coming here to take over. And they're not coming here in droves. They're not coming here in mass. They're coming here in small numbers. They're coming here, in relatively small droves. In places like Germany, where you're getting almost 1 million refugees in 2015 in 1 year, getting almost 1 million refugees. I think that's the statistic. And then over the course of several years, you're getting hundreds of thousands of these Syrian refugees every single year every single year, you are going to fundamentally change your culture. You're going to fundamentally change your politics. Because now when you have all these immigrants coming in, now when you have all these refugees coming in, like I said, different religion, different culture, different civilization, different everything, different aspirations, different vision for society, completely different vision for society, no shared history. When you have people like that coming in, effectively the only way to coexist with them is to accommodate them, to roll out the red carpet for them. Because if the population rises up and says, no, we don't want all these people here, no, we don't want to live with these people, no, we don't share their values, of course you're going to have conflict. You're going to have tension. You're going to have social and political clash, obviously. So you have to roll out the red carpet for these people. You have to be accommodating, because otherwise you're going to destabilize the whole society. So you have to vote in these left-wing, liberal, pro-immigration, globalist politicians who are going to let all of this stuff slide and roll out the red carpet for all of these illegal immigrants, because that's the only way, literally the only way, to keep their society from a revolution. Because if you get in all these right-wingers and all these nationalists and all these immigration restrictionists into the government who use anti-immigration rhetoric and say bad things about Muslims, you're basically going to spark a fire in the population. So you have to anesthetize the population. You have to restrict the population from revolting. And the best thing they can do is, like what you're seeing in Ireland, like what you're seeing in Scotland, like what you're seeing in Wales, like what you're seeing in the UK and England, where they are raising the nation's flags as a sign of rebellion, as a sign of revolt. And they're going around and they're taking down all these Palestinian flags. And here's the thing about that. I am pro-Palestine. I am anti-Zionist. I do think we should have a Palestinian state. But at the same time, when you go to a place, I forget the name of the neighborhood. I think it's Town Hamlet. Let me look it up just real quick. Or it could be Tower Hamlet. Is it Tower Hamlet? Oh, yeah, I think it's Tower Hamlet. Oh, yeah. Tower Hamlet. There you go. So it's a borough in London. So when you look at a place like Tower Hamlets in the UK, which at one point was 95% English, 95% white, and now it's 39% white, 61% Muslim, 61% Arab. If you look at a place like that, in the streets, these people are openly practicing Sharia law. When they get sworn into government, they are putting their hand on the Quran. They're not putting their hand on the Bible. They're putting their hand on the Quran. And it's the same thing for all of them. Some of them are putting their hand on the Hindu Bible or the Tao Bible or the Confucian Bible or the Buddhist Bible or whatever they call them. I forgot what they're called, the Pali Canon or something. They're putting their hand on the Pali Canon when they get sworn into the English Parliament. It's crazy. A lot of these people are putting their hand on the Quran, though. And the point I'm making here is, in a place like Tower Hamlet in the UK, where the vast majority of the people are Muslim, the problem that you have here is there is such a cultural clash, there is such a clash of values, that when there is a crime, a sexual harassment, a rape, a shooting, a stabbing, anything that happens in this neighborhood, in this borough, and it's a Muslim against a non-Muslim, it is literally mandated in Sharia law, in the Hadiths, or in the Quran, or wherever, that a Muslim is not supposed to tell on a non-Muslim, a Muslim is not supposed to tell on a Muslim to a non-Muslim. Which is to say, if a Muslim commits a crime in Tower Hamlet, you can't go to the English police, you can't go to a law enforcement officer who works in London and tell on them, because that goes against the Muslim religion. It goes against the code, because they see themselves as a part of the Ummah, which is to say one nation of Muslims. So these are some of the problems here. And that's one of the good things I'll say about Trump. That's one of the good things, and I'll end this video off on a positive note. One of the good things I'll say about Trump. Here's the silver lining here. I want to end this video off on a positive note. Here's the silver lining. For a long time, our approach to the cartels has been limited. It's been limited, it's been restrained, it's been respectful, it's been, limited. It's been whatever. It hasn't been an all-out blitz against the cartels. For a long time, that has been the doctrine, and the problem has actually only gotten worse. The cartels have only become a bigger problem. From the start of the campaign, when the Jewish president of Mexico, this Jewish lady, Scheinbaum, so from 2023, when her campaign started, in November of 2023 until June of 2024, 57 politicians were killed by the cartel. People being shot on the freeway. You're going to have this little Toyota pickup with 4 masked narcos leaning out of the window, shooting at a black Escalade with tinted windows and killing politicians who are inside it. They're killing politicians on the freeway. They're killing politicians in the morning when they're leaving their house with a cup of coffee in their hand. They're killing politicians during campaign speeches. They're killing politicians at parks, at basketball courts. That is how bad the assassinations and the terrorism has gotten with the cartels in Mexico. If you're a politician in Mexico, there's a target on your head immediately. So the strategy that we've been implementing for the better part of 20 years, since 2000, has not succeeded. It has not worked. And the evidence of that is obvious. So this change in doctrine from the Trump administration, it is a silver lining, because whether or not Congress gets authorization, whether or not there's approval, whether or not there is a chain of command, or you got to go through Congress and all, you don't have to do all that with Trump. Trump will just do what he wants. And that's one of the many things I like about the Trump administration. They'll just do things. They'll change the name of the DOD to the War of Defense, or the Department of War. They'll change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. They'll change the name of the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Gulf. They'll do things like that with absolutely no consent from anybody else. They'll just do things. And personally, I would much prefer a president who is not castrated by the administrative state, by the bureaucratic state, the deep state, the Congress, and all these unelected officials in the Supreme Court. I would much rather a transformative, visionary, strong, bold leader like Trump, who will just drone strike a random vessel in the middle of nowhere, than a guy like Biden or a guy like Obama or some other Democrat skin suit who feels like he's the custodian of the Constitution, and he's restrained by proceduralism, and everything is processual, and everything is technical, and everything has to go through the bureaucracy. You got to talk to 20 people before you can do anything. I would much rather live in a world and have an executive branch that's strong and can exercise its will than live under this tyranny of structurelessness, or this tyranny of bureaucracy and the courts and the legislative branch that are effectively inert. That's one of the good things about the Trump administration. He is changing the way that politics is carried out. No more are we living in the years of an Obama or a Biden or a Mitt Romney or a Bush or a Clinton. Those days are over. We have action-oriented, goal-oriented executives who are actually going to mobilize resources to implement their doctrine. So we need more of that moving forward. And I feel like, I have lost quite a bit of faith in electoralism and electoral politics, but I will say this at the very least. Trump and Trumpism will leave a mark on this country, unquestionably. We just need more serious people moving forward, people who won't acquiesce to Wall Street, people who will not acquiesce to the business interests, to AIPAC, to Israel, to foreign heads of state. We need people who will not acquiesce moving forward, because the Republicans will acquiesce, the Democrats will acquiesce. We need something fresh. Anyways, that's all I have to say about the cartels in Venezuela and mass migration. That's all I have to say about that. Hope you guys liked the episode. If you did, like, subscribe, comment. And with that being said, before I go, I want to leave with this. I have a lot of school stuff coming up this semester. I have work, school, studying, and I want to be able to put out 3 videos a week. I really do, 3 shows, because my last video was from like last Tuesday, and that's just inexcusable. I don't want to go 7-10 days without posting. I want to post 3 days a week, 2 at the minimum, but I just want to make sure that the quality is good. I don't want to let you guys down. I don't want to let down my audience with mediocre commentary, with mediocre analysis. I really want to do my best to give you guys quality content, give you guys, food for thought, because at the end of the day, my goal is to get the people I want elected. I want my vision for society to be materialized. That's the reason why I'm doing this. For you guys, because I want to talk to you guys, and I appreciate you guys as supporters, and I want to grow the audience, but also because I want to win, and I want to change this country and get the right people in office. Anyways, with that being said, I appreciate you guys watching the video. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, share, and with that being said, I'm out.